I never planned to disappoint my parents, but sometimes life has different plans, and success doesn't always look the way others expect it to. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and this is the story of how I went from being the failed son to revolutionizing medical research, though my family would take a while to understand that. Growing up in a family of doctors wasn't easy. My father, Dr. James Sullivan, was chief of surgery at Boston General. My mother, Dr. Elizabeth Sullivan, ran a thriving private practice, and my sister Catherine, perfect, brilliant Catherine, was following directly in their footsteps, already in her residency at Mass General at just 27. Then there was me, the youngest, the one who was supposed to complete the family legacy. The Sullivans have been doctors for 4 generations, Dad would remind me constantly, usually while showing visitors the wall of medical degrees in his study. Your great-grandfather started the tradition, and every Sullivan since has carried it forward. I still remember the day I got my acceptance letter to Harvard Medical School. Dad actually cried, the only time I'd ever seen tears in his eyes. Mom threw an elaborate dinner party, inviting all their colleagues to celebrate. Our son, following the family tradition, she'd said proudly, raising her glass in a toast. For 2 years, I tried. God, how I tried. I memorized anatomical structures, studied biochemical pathways, learned diagnostic procedures. My grades were decent, not spectacular like Catherine's had been, but solid. Yet something felt wrong. While other students lit up during clinical rotations, excited to interact with patients, I found myself fascinated by the research happening behind the scenes. The labs called to me. The experiments, the data analysis, the pursuit of new treatments. That's where I felt alive. During my 2nd year, I started spending extra time in the research labs, volunteering to help with ongoing studies. Dr. Marcus Whitman, the head of research, noticed my enthusiasm. You have a gift for this, he told me one evening as I analyzed data from his latest drug trial. The way you see patterns, how you question established protocols, it's exactly what we need in medical research. That conversation changed everything. For the first time, I could see a different path. One that still helped people, still advanced medicine, but in a way that actually excited me. When I told my parents I was leaving medical school to pursue a PhD in medical research, you'd have thought I'd announced I was becoming a street performer. Research? Dad spat the word like it tasted bad. That's what people do when they can't handle real medicine. Think about what you're throwing away. Mom pleaded. All that hard work, the family legacy. Catherine just shook her head, that familiar look of superiority on her face. I always knew you didn't have what it takes. But I'd made my decision. I withdrew from medical school and enrolled in Stanford's PhD program in medical research and drug development. My parents didn't speak to me for 6 months. The next 3 years were a blur of work and isolation. While my family attended medical galas and society functions without me, I buried myself in research. My doctoral thesis focused on developing an AI-driven approach to drug discovery, using machine learning to predict how compounds would interact with specific disease pathways. Dr. Whitman, who'd become my mentor, helped me secure grants and connections. What you're doing could change how we develop new treatments, he'd say, reviewing my latest results. Don't let anyone tell you this isn't real medicine. I missed my family, but every attempt at reconciliation hit a wall. Dad would hang up if I mentioned my research. Mom would try to convince me it wasn't too late to return to medical school. Catherine just stopped acknowledging my existence altogether. Then came the breakthrough. Using my AI system, we identified a novel compound that showed remarkable promise in treating an aggressive form of leukemia. The preliminary results were stunning: 89% effectiveness in laboratory trials, with minimal side effects. Pharmaceutical companies started calling. Research journals wanted to publish our findings. The medical community was buzzing about the Sullivan Protocol, though my family remained conspicuously silent. Dr. Whitman called me into his office one October morning, practically bouncing with excitement. "They're creating a new position," he said, sliding a document across his desk. "Head of Research and Drug Development, overseeing all research projects at Boston General and its affiliated hospitals. The board unanimously voted to offer it to you." I stared at the offer letter, my heart pounding. This was bigger than I'd ever dreamed, and at Boston General, my father's hospital. "There's more," Dr. Whitman continued, his eyes twinkling. "The announcement will be made at the hospital's annual Christmas gala. Rather fitting, don't you think?" The gala, the biggest event of the hospital's social calendar, where my family would be holding court, as they did every year. "They don't know it's you yet," he added. "The board wanted to keep it quiet until the announcement. Only the hospital chief and I know." I thought about declining, about taking one of the other offers I'd received. But something in me wanted this. Wanted to prove that my path was just as valid, just as important as the one they'd chosen for me. The weeks leading up to the gala were surreal. I knew my family would be there. They never missed it. Dad would be expecting to hold his usual place of honor at the main table. Mom would be showing off Catherine's latest achievements. And I would be changing everything. 2 days before the gala, Mom called, the first time in months. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "We think it's time you came home for Christmas. Catherine's being considered for chief resident, and the family should be together to celebrate." I could hear what she wasn't saying. Come home, admit your mistake, be properly contrite about your failure. "Of course," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'll be there." The night of the gala arrived cold and clear, snowflakes drifting past the hospital's grand entrance. I arrived early, as Dr. Whitman had instructed, and waited in his office while guests filled the ballroom. Through the office window, I could see my family arriving. Dad in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, Mom elegant in burgundy silk, Catherine practically glowing in a designer gown. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations on Catherine's latest achievement. At precisely 8 p.m., Dr. Whitman appeared at my door. "Ready?" I straightened my tie, checked my reflection one last time. "Ready." We walked toward the ballroom, where I could hear the hospital chief, Dr. Harrison, beginning his speech. "And now, it gives me great pleasure to announce an exciting new chapter in Boston General's commitment to medical excellence." I paused just outside the doorway, heart thundering in my chest. "Please join me in welcoming our new head of research and drug development, the brilliant mind behind the Sullivan Protocol." I stepped into the room, Dr. Whitman beside me. Dr. Marcus Sullivan. The sound of shattering glass cut through the applause as my parents' champagne glasses hit the floor. Catherine's perfect smile froze, then cracked. Dad's face went from confusion to shock to something I couldn't quite read. Mom just stared, her hand pressed to her throat, as Dr. Harrison continued praising my achievements, describing how my research would revolutionize treatment protocols across the hospital system. I walked to the podium, acutely aware of every eye in the room. As I began my acceptance speech, I caught Dr. Whitman's encouraging nod. saw the pride in his eyes that I'd never seen in my father's. "Medicine isn't just about treating symptoms," I said, my voice growing stronger. "It's about finding new ways to heal, new paths to hope." Sometimes the greatest contributions to medical science come from asking different questions, from daring to step off the traditional path. The room burst into applause, but my family remained frozen, their world shifting beneath their feet. As I stepped down from the podium, Dr. Harrison beaming beside me, I could see them struggling to reconcile their failed son with the accomplished researcher everyone else was celebrating. The evening was far from over, and I knew the real confrontation was yet to come. But for now, watching my family's carefully constructed narrative crumble, I allowed myself a small smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about proving that success can look different than anyone expected. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom when I saw my father making his way toward me, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. But before he could reach me, Dr. Harrison swept me away to meet the board members, leaving my family stranded in their shock. "Marcus, my boy," Dr. Harrison beamed, "let me introduce you to our major donors. They're particularly interested in your AI-driven drug discovery platform." For the next hour, I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, explaining my research, accepting congratulations. From the corner of my eye, I could see my family huddled together, whispering furiously. Catherine kept glancing at me, her perfect composure cracking every time someone mentioned my name with reverence. "Your protocol could revolutionize cancer treatment," one board member gushed. "To think, we'll be the first hospital system to implement it." "The Sullivan Protocol," another added. "Though I must say, we had no idea you were related to James. He never mentioned." "Did he not?" I smiled politely. How surprising. The irony wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. My father, who never missed an opportunity to brag about Catherine's achievements, had kept his own son's groundbreaking research a secret. Now that secret was making headlines in the medical community. Finally, as the crowd thinned, my father made his move. He approached with Mom and Catherine in tow, their faces carefully composed for their audience. "Marcus," he said stiffly, "we should talk. Privately." Dr. Whitman, who hadn't left my side all evening, stepped closer. "Actually, Marcus has a press conference in 20 minutes. Perhaps later?" The look on my father's face was priceless. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the most important doctor in the room. "Press conference?" Catherine blurted, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Of course," Dr. Whitman replied smoothly. "The Sullivan Protocol is big news. Every major medical journal wants details." Mom's hand tightened on her clutch. "The Sullivan Protocol?" "Oh yes," Dr. Harrison joined in, practically glowing. "Named after your son, of course. Though I'm surprised you haven't read about it. It's been the talk of the medical community for months." The press conference was held in the hospital's main auditorium. I watched my family slip into the back row as I took the podium, surrounded by journalists and cameras. For the next hour, I explained my research, answered questions, and outlined how the protocol would be implemented across the hospital system. "Dr. Sullivan," one reporter asked, "your approach to drug discovery is being called revolutionary. What inspired you to take such an innovative path?" I could feel my family's eyes boring into me as I answered. Sometimes the greatest medical breakthroughs come from being willing to question traditional approaches. While clinical practice is vital, research and innovation are equally crucial to advancing medical science. The questions continued, each answer highlighting the impact of my work. I could see Catherine's face, growing increasingly pinched as reporters referred to me as Dr. Sullivan, a title she'd always thought would be exclusively hers in our generation. After the press conference, I found my family waiting in Dr. Harrison's office. Dad closed the door behind me, his jaw set. "How long have you been planning this?" he demanded. "Planning what?" I replied calmly. "My research? My career? Or the moment you'd have to acknowledge that leaving medical school wasn't actually a failure?" "You blindsided us," Catherine burst out, in front of everyone. "Like you blindsided me last Christmas," I countered. "When you announced your chief resident candidacy and Mom said, 'At least one of our children isn't a disappointment.'" Mom flinched. "Marcus, we were just concerned about your future." "No," I cut in. "You were concerned about appearances. About your precious family legacy. Well, guess what? I've secured that legacy, just not in the way you planned." I pulled out my phone and pulled up an email. This came in during the press conference. The Sullivan Protocol is being adopted by 3 major hospital systems across the country. There's talk of a Nobel nomination in a few years. Dad sank into a chair, looking suddenly old. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I tried. For 3 years, I tried to tell you about my research. You didn't want to hear it. You didn't attend my PhD defense, didn't read any of my published papers, didn't return my calls when the first trials succeeded. We thought." Mom began. "You thought I was a failure," I finished, "because I chose a different path. Because I dared to think that maybe, just maybe, there was more than one way to save lives." Catherine stood up straighter, her defense mechanism kicking in. "Well, you could have handled this more professionally, springing it on us at the gala, like you're handling your chief resident application professionally," I asked mildly. She froze. "What do you mean?" I smiled, remembering Dr. Whitman's words from earlier. "As head of research, I'll be on the selection committee. Interesting timing, isn't it?" The color drained from her face as the implications sank in. Our parents looked between us, suddenly realizing the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. "You wouldn't," Catherine whispered. "Wouldn't what?" "Judge candidates fairly, based on their merits rather than family connections." "That's exactly what I'll do." I moved toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a department to run." "Marcus, wait," Dad called out. "What about Christmas?" I turned back, hand on the doorknob. "What about it? I believe I was told there's no place for failures at the Sullivan Christmas table." "We were wrong," Mom said quietly, tears in her eyes. "So wrong." "Yes, you were." I opened the door. "But don't worry. I'll be celebrating at the hospital's Christmas party instead. As guest of honor, I really shouldn't miss it." The next few weeks were a study in family dynamics under pressure. Word of my appointment and my research spread through Boston's medical community like wildfire. Colleagues who had snubbed me at my parents' parties now sought my attention. Hospitals that had rejected my fellowship applications years ago called with collaboration offers. Catherine's application for chief resident landed on my desk in early December. It was excellent. She'd always been brilliant. But there were other candidates, equally qualified, who hadn't spent years mocking their siblings' career choices. When the selection committee met, I recused myself from voting on her application, citing family connections. It was the professional thing to do. And it drove Catherine crazy, knowing she couldn't accuse me of bias either way. She got the position on her own merits, but the process taught her a valuable lesson about humility. The first time she had to consult my department about a patient's experimental treatment protocol, I could see it physically pained her to acknowledge my expertise. Dad tried to repair things in his own way, suddenly discovering an interest in research. He began forwarding me articles about AI in medicine, making awkward attempts to discuss my work at hospital functions. "I've been reading about your protocol," he said stiffly one day, catching me in the hospital corridor. "The applications for personalized medicine are impressive." It wasn't quite an apology, but from James Sullivan, it was close. Mom took a different approach. She started showing up at my office with lunch, listening as I explained my current projects. Sometimes I caught her looking at me with a mixture of pride and regret, perhaps finally seeing the son she'd had all along instead of the one she tried to force me to be. That Christmas, Dr. Harrison hosted a special dinner to celebrate the first successful treatments using the Sullivan protocol. 3 patients who'd been given months to live were now in remission, thanks to the precision-targeted therapies we developed. As I stood to give a speech, I saw my family in the audience. They weren't at their usual center table, commanding attention. Instead, they sat quietly, watching as their failed son received a standing ovation from the medical community they'd once thought would reject me. "Medicine isn't just about following established paths," I said, looking directly at them. "It's about having the courage to forge new ones. Every medical breakthrough in history came from someone who dared to think differently." After the dinner, Catherine approached me alone. "I was wrong," she said simply. "We all were." "Yes," I agreed, "you were." She smiled slightly. "Still not coming to Christmas dinner?" "Actually, I'm hosting my own this year. The research team has become quite a family." I paused. "You're welcome to join us, see what we're working on. If you can handle not being the only Dr. Sullivan in the room." She laughed, a real laugh this time. "I think I'm learning to handle that just fine." 5 years have passed since that night at the gala. The Sullivan Protocol has been implemented in hospitals worldwide, saving countless lives. Dad still struggles sometimes with my non-traditional path, but he's learned to brag about his researcher son almost as much as his surgeon daughter. Mom has become an unexpected advocate for medical research, starting a foundation to support innovative approaches to treatment. And Catherine, well, she's still Catherine, but now she calls me for advice sometimes, acknowledging that there's more than one way to be a medical pioneer. Last week, I received the National Medal of Science. As I stood at the podium, I could see my family in the audience. Really see them, without the weight of expectations and disappointment clouding their faces. "Success doesn't always look the way we expect," I told the crowd. "Sometimes it looks like failure, until the moment it changes everything." After the ceremony, Dad hugged me for the first time in years. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry we didn't see it sooner." I hugged him back, feeling the last bits of old pain finally fade away. "It's okay," I said. "Some treatments just take time to work." Now when people talk about the Sullivan medical legacy, they don't just mean surgeons and clinicians. They mean researchers, innovators, pioneers. They mean me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right, in ways no one could have imagined. And sometimes, just sometimes, that revenge changes not just your own life, but the lives of countless others. That's a prescription for success that any doctor would approve.